guys, it's so nice to have you all in today. I dressed extra fancy today here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants because today has just been like the most fun day ever. It sort of epitomizes what we're all about as an organization. So we started earlier today with some of these same classes joining, talking about insect societies with the amazing Dr. Turner live in the UK. That was awesome. I just wrapped up like 5 minutes ago hanging out with Joe in the Gambia on a ship with like chimpanzees in an island made of shells. And we are wrapping up the day with our favorite ship team of all time. Don't tell the other ship teams, and there actually are other ship teams, so keep your lips sealed. We're joined live on the RV Falkor 2, the coolest, slickest vessel for highlighting science on planet Earth. We're going to hang out with Josh on board the ship, take a little bit of a tour on their epic journey looking at plankton poo and other cool things out on the oceans. And this is sort of the second half of a double header with them. Very rarely do we do the same broadcast twice or get to highlight a cool expedition 2 times in a row, but this one was just too much fun and we had to bring you back. So for those new to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we're all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science to kids around the world. And of all the days you could have joined us, I'm so glad you chose today. You're in for a real treat. Without further ado, I'm going to zip it, turn you over to Josh, and let's head to the deck of the ship. Hey, guys.
Hi. Yes, as you said, I'm Josh. I'm here on the Falkor 2 at the moment, and we're actually just in the process now of wrapping up our expedition. So as we do our walkthrough of the ship, you'll see that there are going to be a whole bunch of people all packing everything away. This area over here used to contain a whole bunch of nets, but we're now in the process of packing them all up. But I'm going to walk you through some of the science and some of the research we've been doing on this ship over the past about month or so. And essentially now, as we're coming into Rio, we now need to start packing all of these things up. So essentially, the point of the cruise that we're on over here, so this has been part of the bioreactors cruise. This cruise has been looking at essentially trying to understand how animals, these animals which migrate vertically during the day and night. So during the daytime, they sink down into the deeper waters so they don't get eaten. And at nighttime, they come up to the surface to feed. So one of the key questions that we've been trying to understand through this cruise is what role does this, what we call diel vertical migration, so this daily cycle of these animals moving up in the nighttime, down in the daytime, what role does this play in exporting carbon from the surface ocean down into the deep ocean? Because what we think is happening is that these zooplankton come up to the surface to eat at night. They then move down in the daytime and they poop down in the deep ocean, therefore sequestering, keeping all of that carbon deep down. So the way that we've tried to answer some of these questions is by conducting a number of various different net tows. So the net used to be over here until I think about this morning, but I think we have some footage of it. This is a large Mach Ness net. So essentially the way that this net works, excellent. I think you guys are seeing a thingy of it being deployed, a sped up version of it being deployed. So essentially the way that this net works is it's a combination of I think 6 or 7 different nets. And so what this allows you to do is at different depths in the ocean, we drop the net down to about 1,500 meters in the water. Then we open up different nets. So in the deep one, we then collect in one net. We bring the Mach Ness, that entire system of nets, up a certain amount. We then close that net, open up a new one, and so on and so on. So then as we bring that net up in the water column, we're able to capture just the species that are living at that particular depth range in the water column. Here we go, perfect. So now you should be seeing a diagram. So there you can see that's just with one of the nets open, the top net open, and then the bottom nets are all closed. So yeah, what we do is we open those different nets at different depth ranges. And by being able to conduct those tows during the day and during the night, we're able to see where do we find these animals in the day and in the night. And then we're able to also analyze what are the contents of their stomachs, so what are their gut contents, what are their gut microbiomes, essentially looking at a whole bunch of information to try and figure out where are these animals eating, are they vertically migrating, and if they are vertically migrating, or even if they're not, what is the impact of their gut system on the breaking down of the organic matter that they're eating. So that piece of equipment, the one that's now packed away, has been the kind of main showpiece of the cruise that we're doing today. This has been the first cruise I've ever been on that's had one of these things, and it's really, really an amazing piece of equipment. It, however, is not the only thing that we've been trying to collect now during this cruise. So we're going to slowly now start moving back up the deck of the ship. So we've been doing a number of other various different forms of tows as well. We've included a few tows of a tucker trawl, which is essentially a Mach Ness, but with only one net. So there you just go down the water column, up the water column. So it's a slightly less fancy version of a Mach Ness, of that big fancy net. We've been doing some zooplankton tows. You can actually see one hanging up over here to dry. This is able to catch much smaller things. I'm not sure what the lighting's like, but this will be able to catch much smaller things. So then you're able to determine essentially the much smaller animals in the water column and how they are migrating and how they are in the water column. Let us continue moving up the ship. So yes, essentially what this allows us to try and do is to try and understand what is the role and what is the impact of these various different animals in helping to take carbon from the surface ocean into the deep ocean. So my field, my background in research is actually got nothing to do with animals whatsoever. I am an ocean biogeochemist. What that ultimately means is I look at the chemistry of seawater. Anything that's bigger than about one cell really, really confuses me. I look at the dissolved chemistry of seawater. So it's actually been really amazing on this cruise to be able to see all of these larger animals, which tie in so nicely into this ecosystem. However, what we've been able to find and what we've found with this cruise that we've actually been on so far, we started off in Argentina in a place called Puerto Madryn. It's quite far south, where we have this impact of the Malvinas Current, this kind of water coming up from Antarctica, incredibly cold, incredibly nutrient rich. So the ocean, very similar to land, things can only really grow in the ocean where there are nutrients. So the same way that on land, plants grow better when you give them fertilizer. Aha, there we go. I think you're now seeing a cruise track of what we've been doing. So that's where we are currently. We're currently on our way back into Brazil. We're at the very northern part of our transect. But yes, so essentially when we were starting this in the southern area, there was much colder, nutrient-rich water. This means that phytoplankton, these essentially trees, these plants of the ocean, are able to grow in huge abundance. As we've now been moving north up this transect, we've been slowly but surely coming into more and more nutrient-poor waters. The waters now are about, 28 degrees Celsius at the surface. So the waters now are warm. And what this means is that one of the main ways that nutrients are provided to the ocean or to the surface ocean is through what we call upwelling. So that is nutrients from the deep ocean being brought up to the surface. And when they are up in the surface, phytoplankton in the surface, which require light, are then able to grow in that surface with those nutrients. So because we have this incredibly warm layer on top, you can once again think about the ocean a little bit like a large swimming pool or a lake that's been sitting in the sun for the whole day. If you've ever been swimming in one of these, you'll notice that when your feet are up, it's really nice and warm. But as soon as you stick your feet down, they start to freeze at depth. So the ocean is very similar, just obviously at a much bigger scale. So you've felt this. When you stick your feet down, it's a very stable configuration. The warm water floats on top, cold water underneath. And so what that then means is that it's really hard to mix over that warm to cold boundary. So in these areas, such as in the southern area where we were sampling now, this cold water was being brought to the surface, all those nutrients coming with it. Here in this northern section, that warm layer is very strong and very thick, and so there's much less life growing in this ocean. And we've seen that so clearly in the Mockness. We've seen the essentially community of things that are growing, the community of phytoplankton, the community of fish, the community of crustaceans that we've caught in the south compared to those in the north. The communities have completely changed, so we can see that really clearly. So the work that I actually do is looking at the seawater. The way that we collect our seawater is with this large machine over here. This thing is essentially a very fancy assortment of buckets, where we've got these various different tubes over here, which we open up when we send it down. Here we go, so I can show you. If we open them up like this, they essentially are just hollow tubes. So we open the top, open the bottom, we send them down, and then as we bring it up, we then are able to close them at certain depths. Now, this machine also has a whole bunch of sensors on it. It can tell us the temperature of the water that it's in. It can tell us the pressure that it's in, so exactly how deep it is. It can tell us the conductivity, which allows us to tell the salinity of the water. There are also a whole bunch of other sensors which allow us to see the, essentially, there's a fluorometer, which tells us how things are luminescing. There are some fancy other pieces of equipment. There's this camera thing, which doesn't actually normally live on one of these machines, but it's here now for the moment. We've got something which is able to measure some of the concentrations of nutrients in real time. And from all of this data, we're then able to get these very high resolution profiles from all the sensors, but then from the bottles, where we close them at certain depths, we're then able to measure a whole bunch of the ocean chemistry. So this is essentially what I do. Every time we send down one of these, I'm here, I come and collect the water. You can see There we go. So this is some water that would have come from, I think this is now about 150 meters or so in the water column for this particular bottle. But yes, so essentially I then collect this water, I package it up very nicely, so do a bit of preparation to it so it can store properly, and then I ship it back to land so that we're able to analyze it with our lab equipment back on land. So that's a lot of the work that I do. And through being able to do this, exactly the same questions we're trying to answer through this whole cruise, which is how do we get CO2? What are the effective mechanisms by which we get CO2 from the surface ocean down into the deep ocean? We've seen, and at the moment on this cruise, we're looking specifically at how zooplankton and fish help with that migration, with that transport of the CO2 from the surface to depth. However, that's not the only way that we can take this carbon fixed in the surface, this carbon that's grown and fixed into biology in the surface down into the deep ocean. I look at it from a chemical mass balance perspective. So for me, in my research, I don't really care if a zooplankton took it down, if it sank down as a tiny little particle of sinking, essentially marine snow. Whatever mechanism it goes by which it is taken from the surface ocean down into the deep ocean, we're able to capture that in the chemistry through being able to have a look at the chemical mass balance. So as I just mentioned there before, another way in which we're able to take carbon from the surface ocean down to the deep ocean is through the sinking marine snow. On this cruise, we're also beginning to quantify that. And we do this through these. These are sediment traps. So just as it sounds, essentially these tubes, we go and we suspend them in the water. We leave them out for 3 days. We did a 24-hour deployment recently. We essentially leave them out for a certain amount of time and see how much stuff just settles into these tubes. So we just let them float in the water, see how much stuff settles into it, and then from there we're able to see this, what we call sinking flux, the amount of marine snow that is sinking down in the water column and being collected. So we've deployed a number of these different sediment traps over here at various different depths in the water column to be able to see how much of the stuff from the surface is sinking down into depth. All of this sinking, all of this vertical migration, the reason why all of this is important is that our ocean is currently consuming and taking up a huge amount of the CO2 that is being produced. If our ocean were not able to slurp up the CO2 we're currently pumping out into the atmosphere, we would be in a much, much worse situation than we currently are. And so essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand how effectively is the ocean doing this. Because honestly, at the moment, we kind of know, but we don't really know the ways in which it does it. And it's very, very not well constrained as of right now. So that's the work that we're trying to do here. We're trying to understand just how much the ocean is currently saving us. So cool. I think I'm going to stop here for some questions and then we'll move on to the ROV. So are there any questions so far on anything that I've spoken about yet?
Amazing. Well, first of all, you are just dripping with enthusiasm for this. There's very few people we've ever had on that are quite so passionate, especially about buckets in the ocean. So thank you very much for that. We will dive in with some questions. We got a whole bunch of classes live with us. And then again, we're going to go on more journey students. So if you're keen to save anything, we will come back to you, I promise. But we can begin with Mr. Hancock's class in Georgetown. What I think I'll do is one per group right now, and then we'll come back. Hey, guys.
Oh no, is it working? There we are.
We're working, it's good.
Awesome. Well, the first thing we wanted to note is that we're up here in Ontario and we're freezing and it looks nice and warm where you are. But one of the students was wondering, could we see the sediment tube? Is there any sediment in there right now?
So here we go. I can show it to you again. No, there is not. So basically what we do is as soon as it comes out of the water, we collect it. We collect it immediately because we want to try and preserve them in as essentially pure a state as possible. Because if you, like these tubes at the moment, they're all sitting here in the atmosphere. Anything could currently be falling into these tubes. So one of the big problems, and I face this a lot because obviously in chemistry, contamination is a huge issue. So we spend a huge amount of time and effort trying to prevent contamination. And the way that we do that is, well, particularly in relation to these sediment tubes, is by being able to try and essentially take those samples that we collect and preserve them as quickly as possible, making sure that the only thing that we're measuring when we measure those samples is the thing that was collected in the water and not a piece of dust that floated in while it's here on the ship.
Fantastic. Thanks, man. And thanks for the first question, guys. We're going to head to La Villa, North Topsail Beach. Miss Barajas and our Glenview, Illinois crew are coming to you guys in a second. Come on in. Take us away.
Hi. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Very well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Yes. So I was wondering, what does it mean to have carbon at the bottom of the ocean versus the top?
Oh, that's a very, very, very good question. So, the ocean, as I alluded to before, the ocean, you can almost very simplistically divide it into two layers. Obviously, it's much, much, much more complicated than this. The surface layer of the ocean is in what we call equilibration with the atmosphere. So, it's able to exchange. So, oxygen, CO2, gases at the surface of the ocean through waves breaking, through just general gas exchange in the surface ocean. But that is in equilibration with the atmosphere. So anything that is in the surface ocean, if we have carbon in the surface ocean, that is able to exchange with the atmosphere. Carbon in the deep ocean has no way of being able to get up into the atmosphere. The only way that it can get there is if this water from very, very deep is upwelled to the surface, is then done in contact with the atmosphere, and then is able to equilibrate. So a lot of these bottom waters, a lot of these waters that are in the very, very, very deep ocean sit there for a very long time. So some of the deepest, densest water is called Antarctic bottom water. This water is formed in the incredibly cold Antarctic, and there it then sinks down right to the bottom of the ocean and stays there for thousands and thousands of years. I think 6,000 to 7,000 years for Antarctic bottom water. It sticks around for ages. There are a whole bunch of other waters at different depths as well, but basically these waters in the deep ocean stay in the deep ocean for a very long time. What this means is that carbon in the deep ocean stays in the deep ocean for a long time. It won't stay there forever. It will come back to the surface in a few thousand to like 7,000-ish years time. So it will come back up to the surface at some point. But as of right now, it's currently slurping up a whole bunch of that carbon from the atmosphere and storing it in the deep ocean. It will come back to haunt us in thousands of years' time. So that is a future problem for us to need to deal with. But right now, it is currently saving us. So that's the difference of it. If it's in the surface ocean, it's able to equilibrate with the atmosphere. If it's in the deep ocean, it's stuck down there until that water is brought up to the surface in a few thousand years' time.
What a great question and what a detailed answer. Thanks, man. That was awesome. We've never had that one in the history of the program. We're going to head to Oxnard, California. Miss Baraja's class, come on in. Then we'll wrap up with Glenview in a minute before we do a little bit more of a journey. Hey, California.
How many planktons are in the bottom of the sea?
Oh, how many plankton are in the bottom of the sea? That's quite a good question. So the cool thing about plankton, and especially I'm going to speak about phytoplankton. Phytoplankton meaning essentially light. Phyto as in light, and then plankton being, plankton. So phytoplankton need light to be able to grow, which means that they can only grow in the surface ocean. So any phytoplankton that we find in the bottom of the sea are ones that have sunk very, 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 very far. So we're not actually going to find that much phytoplankton in the bottom of the ocean. We'll mostly find essentially the remnants of phytoplankton that were eaten in the bottom of the ocean. That's what the marine snow is. That's the poop from the zooplankton, the poop from a whale, the bones of a whale perhaps even. So we'll end up finding, in terms of phytoplankton, not that many in the deep ocean. In the surface ocean, however, we can find tons. So it very much depends where in the ocean we are. In certain areas of the ocean where we have very few nutrients, so that would be those incredibly beautiful, crystal clear blue waters that you'd see at tropical islands. The reason why it's so crystal clear and blue is because there's so little phytoplankton. Whereas in other areas, so I'm actually from South Africa. I study at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. The waters around South Africa, around Cape Town, are incredibly productive. They often look kind of brown and a bit, so you don't really want to swim in them. They're also incidentally very cold. This, once again, is because of these nutrients coming up from the subsurface. There, when you get these kind of brown, kind of dirty-ish looking waters, they hold a huge number of phytoplankton. So in fact, a lot of the work that I'm doing on this ship is filtration. So I collect large volumes of water from this guy, so essentially from different depths in the water, I collect large volumes of water and then put them through these little tiny filters. And what I can see very clearly is that at some depth, so closer to the surface, my filters look either green or brown. So I can literally see these phytoplankton. They're microscopic. You can't see them with your normal eyes. You have to look at them under a microscope. But when you put them onto a filter, you put on so many of them, you can begin to see them on your filter. But as we get deeper and deeper into the water, there are less and less of them. So my filters become less and less colorful. So yes, essentially in the surface ocean, there are billions and there are many, many, many. They are single-celled. They are single-celled, tiny, tiny microscopic organisms, really, really small. You can't see them with the naked eye, but there are so many of them. They produce about 50% of the oxygen that we breathe in our atmosphere. They are massively, massively productive. They grow in huge numbers in the ocean.
I love that you took the question of how many plankton are there and just took it into so many cool different directions. I love it. And fantastic question, Ms. Bara's class. Let's head to Illinois and then we'll continue our walkthrough. Come on in. Take us away. Hey.
What is the rarest thing you've ever found in one of the tanks?
Ooh, no pressure.
Sorry, could you please repeat that? What's the
yeah.
rarest thing we've ever...
The rarest thing in one of your tanks, what's the rarest thing you've ever found?
Oh, that's a very good question. So I'm not particularly qualified to answer that question because, I mean, I look at seawater. Inside here, we sometimes get little jellyfish. We sometimes get kind of larger phytoplankton groups, but I very rarely actually know what they are until we've been able to analyze it later. And I mostly tend to look at the chemistry of them. So when I put them down to the filter, I then actually burn that filter and analyze the chemicals that come out of it. So in terms of rareness collected from these guys, I'm not entirely sure. I'm sure that we have definitely collected a whole bunch of very, very rare phytoplankton, very rare species in these before. But because I look mostly at the chemistry of it, I don't really know. I can tell you what they're made of. I can tell you the rare things have a certain amount of carbon, a certain amount of nitrogen, a certain amount of phosphorus, a certain amount of oxygen. I can't necessarily tell you exactly what it is. However, the fact that you've asked this question on this cruise particularly is really, really cool. Because on this cruise, we have been collecting a whole bunch of stuff that you can see with that mockness, with the ROV, which we'll be getting to very, very shortly. And there, we've been seeing so many incredible, incredible creatures. I think there have certainly been some creatures that we've caught in our mockness, caught in our nets, which at least on the ship, nobody on the ship knew what they were. And the people on the ship know a lot. They don't necessarily know everything that there is to know about every creature on Earth, but they know a lot about the creatures that we're finding. So I think it is incredibly likely that we will have found something that has never been described before. That's generally actually very, very likely on these types of cruises where you're doing kind of mid-water, deep-water trawls and with an ROV. You often make new discoveries. Almost every cruise that one goes on, one tends to make new discoveries. But to be able to find out that it is a new discovery, that this thing that we're looking at is actually a new species that no one has ever seen before, it obviously has to go through a whole long process of making sure that the absolute experts in the field don't know what this is, that it is something that is actually new. So that takes years and years and years. So essentially, to answer your question, on this cruise, we have found some animals where no one on the ship knows what it is. It looks like it might be a new species. We're not able to say that just yet because we need to do a whole bunch more tests. We need to do genetic testing. We need to send it to like the world expert in that particular kind of animal so then they can make that call. But there have been some really, really cool rare species that we've found on this ship, or these species that we don't know about. Yeah, from the people on the ship don't necessarily know about.
Huh. Josh, you're one of the few people who matches me for sheer enthusiasm. You might have me beat. So I love these answers so far. I'm going to let you go on a little bit of a journey, show us some more, and then we'll come back for a second round in just a few minutes.
Brilliant. That sounds absolutely perfect. So let's head through now to the ROV. So this, for me, admittedly, I'm not particularly qualified to speak on this. So this is the first cruise I've ever been on that had one of these, essentially an underwater submarine. But from here, I've been able to watch them do some of the deployments. They also collect some water from here, so I've been working on some of that. It's really cool. So essentially from here, one might think that there's a pilot that sits inside here. That is not the case for this ROV. There are a bunch of cables which connect this ROV up to the surface, and I'll take you through to the control room later. It basically looks like you could launch and control a spaceship from that control room. But essentially what this ROV does is it's controlled from inside the ship, and they're able to drive it around. They're able to use these propellers to maneuver it around in the ocean and then be able to see things and collect things as well. So let's slowly make our way around this ROV. So as we move over here, these guys are more of those fancy buckets I was showing you just before. They're a bit smaller, but the ROV is able to collect seawater. So we're able to collect some seawater where now we're actually able to see what's in that seawater as we close these buckets. And so that's really, really cool. It enables us to get some more information about the water we are sampling. As we move around here to the front, we have this big robotic arm. So just like as you'd expect for one of these ROVs, this is remote operated vehicle. It's got these like little pincer arm things which they're able to control from the control room. They're able to pick stuff up. In this cruise, we have mostly been working in the midwater. So we haven't gone right down to the deep ocean, down to the sea floor. And so as a result, I'm not sure if there's been too much use for it. I know they did a cool thing where they released a feather into the ocean as an art presentation, which was really, really cool. But other than that, I'm not totally sure how the arms have been used on this cruise. The cool thing about this ROV and it's really amazing. I've never been on a cruise with one of these before, as I've said before. Are these incredibly high quality cameras. They have these two really amazing cameras. It genuinely looks like, you know those nature documentaries where when you're watching them, you go into the deep ocean, you see these mysterious animals in the deep ocean. It has honestly felt like that. We've seen some phenomenal jellyfish. We've seen some phenomenal fish. We've seen some really incredible things. I've only ever seen these fish in these nature documentaries, but now we've been seeing these fish with those huge, sharp, jagged teeth. All of those deep sea species. One of the things that's been really interesting to note actually with those is I was really surprised by how small all of those deep sea fish are. In these nature documentaries, I've always expected them to be large fish, but they're actually maybe about the size of your thumb. They're really not that large, but they have these huge, massive teeth and this bioluminescence, this capacity to be able to make light. It's really incredible. This ROV as well, let's bring back to the ROV. This ROV also has these things over here. These are jelly jars. Essentially, they allow us to collect jellyfish without destroying them in the process. So we've collected a number of jellyfish. I've actually been collecting a few samples from here of an animal called the foraminifera. We unfortunately don't have time to get into those, but they're essentially a really cool single-celled little microorganism, and they preserve very nicely in the sediment record. So they can tell stuff. We can use them to tell stuff about the past ocean. Because by analyzing them in the sediment record, by seeing ones that lived thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and by being able to being able to extrapolate out the conditions, we're then able to extrapolate out the conditions of the ocean in the past. So those are really cool for being able to reconstruct the past ocean. But yeah, essentially this ROV is a really incredible piece of equipment. I know that the Schmidt Ocean Institute does a whole bunch of live streams. I think that they're somewhere on the internet. I think on their YouTube channel, there are a whole bunch of live streams that this ROV has done before. And if you're interested, I would really highly recommend checking them out. It's so cool. It's been incredible to be able to watch these things happen while I've been on the ship. It's really amazing. Okay, cool. So now should we start heading through to the ROV control room?
Yeah. Let's do it. Can't wait.
So this is now the spot where the pilots sit. So the pilots, as I said before, do not sit inside the ROV. They instead sit inside a control room. Ooh la la.
I got the door behind you.
Excellent. So here we go. This is the ROV control room. Currently, the ROV is not deployed, so a lot of the screens aren't really showing very much. But as you can see, essentially what happens is the pilots sit over here. Those incredible, beautiful cameras that I was showing you before, they're displayed.
Sorry, Josh. Oh, there we are.
Yeah.
Just letting you guys know your video cut out for a second there. So you were a black screen. So I wanted to just get that queued up before we keep talking about it.
Yeah.
Here we are.
We're
We're back. We're good.
Cool. Incredible. So yes, basically at the moment, here we are in the ROV control room. So the pilots sit over here, where they're then able to control everything about the ROV. They have those incredibly high resolution cameras. Essentially, that information is displayed on these screens over here. So they're able to then drive the ROV. They also have a bunch of other little cameras around for navigation on the ROV. So they're then able to navigate their way around. I think this is how they do the navigations. Mm-hmm. So, yep, they're then able to navigate their way around. It's really incredible. To be able to be in here while they are doing a dive is amazing. They have so much information about the ROV, about being able to see essentially what we're looking at and then being able to catch the things. I can't quite emphasize just how talented these pilots are to be able to put a jellyfish, which is trying to poof its way away, to be able to capture them in one of those jelly jars, maneuver that massive ROV to be able to get the jellyfish into one of those jars. It's really impressive. So yes, and then, okay, cool, I'm not going to go into that one, but yeah. Essentially, there's a whole bunch of information that they're able to see here from the ROV as they're able to drive it around and able to see the things that we want to see and to be able to collect the samples we want to collect. Because the cool thing about this is that with being able to collect these samples, we're able to have all of the contextual information around where the sample was, what it looked like when it was collected. We have this incredible footage of the samples we collect. So it really is amazing. Perfect. Does anyone have any questions around the ROV or anything like that at the moment?
Oh, man, we've got so many questions, and we're going to come to all our live groups in just a minute. We had one before a class had to go for recess. So they wanted to, Mr. Hancock's class wanted to know, what's the highest, the lowest, the plankton travel? Like, how far do they move throughout the water column? And how long did it take to construct the Falkor 2? Totally different questions.
Beautiful. So phytoplankton themselves don't actually tend to move up and down the water column. Phytoplankton are just these incredibly small single-celled organisms. They kind of are where they are. They have a capacity to what we call ballast, so make themselves more buoyant or less buoyant. They can form big chains which can help them to sink or help them to float, but they're not necessarily that good at being able to actively move up and down. Zooplankton, on the other hand, are very good at being able to move up and down. They move hundreds of meters. Bear in mind, these guys are about this big. They are tiny, like some of them are about this big. Some of them are a little bit bigger, but they are tiny, tiny, tiny organisms, and every single day and night, they move hundreds of meters in the water column, up to the surface at night to feed, down to the depths in the day to escape being eaten, to be fed on. So yeah, in fact, what we can actually see over here, this is something called an EK80. This essentially sends out these little pings in the water column, and it bounces off anything in the water column. So what we can see over here is down at about 250, maybe like that's about 300 meters or so. Here we can see this layer of biomass, this layer of these animals living in the water column now at this depth. If you were to have a look at this earlier in the day, at night, this layer is literally right up at the surface. And when it comes into dawn, you can literally see this thing go down to this depth. And once again, at night, as it gets dusk, this layer migrates up. Unfortunately, we are now in the middle of the day here, so you can only see them now at depth. But it's really incredible to see it. You can see so clearly on here this vertical migration during the day, down to depth, during the night, up to the surface. But yes, to answer that question more explicitly, the phytoplankton themselves don't generally tend to migrate. They generally want to try and stay in the surface ocean where they have a lot of light, but they also need to consider where they're going to get their nutrients from. So some of them stay slightly lower down in the water column because then they get more nutrients, but then they get less light, so it becomes a trade-off in that way. To get to your second question about how long it took the Falkor to be constructed, honestly, I have absolutely no idea to that question. I think Sophia might be more qualified to answer that one.
Sure, I can quickly answer that. I'm behind the camera, by the way. I'm giving you all a thumbs up. But I actually first joined Falkor 2 when it was in the shipyard. And we didn't build Falkor 2 from scratch. We actually refit the ship from a previous industry vessel. And that took about 2 years in a shipyard. Hope that answers your question.
Fantastic, guys. I want to stress, I'm so happy we get to talk about the vertical migration in the ocean. This is something that I learned about as a little boy, but is hardly ever talked about. We don't cover it much in our broadcast. In the last year or so, so many different voyages and scientists are talking about this because it's the greatest movement of creatures on planet Earth, and it happens every single night all over the world. So really, really cool that we get to cover this, and just thanks, man, for the enthusiasm about it all. We're going to take 4 more questions before we wrap up today. I'm going to take one from YouTube, and then we're going to head to our live classes for another round. Caesar in Nicaragua wants to know, if the gray tubes or any element of your mechanism falls to the seafloor from the ROV, do you go and pick it up, or would you just leave it there? What's the deal if that happens?
That is a very good question. Most of the time, we'd probably just leave it there, unfortunately. So oceanography, obviously, we're trying to understand our ocean to try and see how it works, to try and preserve and maintain our ocean's functionality. Unfortunately, things on a ship do go wrong. Stuff sinks down to the bottom of the ocean. Stuff would accidentally fall overboard. There is an option to try and get them back. So I think if the ROV itself were to snap, the cable there were to snap and it were to go down to the bottom of the ocean, that one we probably would try and get back because it's a very, very big, very expensive, very amazing piece of technology. If one of those tubes, one of those plastic tube things went down to the bottom of the ocean, probably not, unfortunately. It'll probably sit down there, probably end up forming part of the pollution that we see in our ocean. There is a huge amount of that pollution. It really is actually quite tragic. I can see it in some of the filters that I collect. The amount of fibers that I get on my filters. It looks like basically what you'd get out of a tumble dryer sometimes on my filters. You can really see a lot of fibers in my filters. But yes, what we can sometimes see is that we would leave some of these things in the deep ocean, unfortunately.
I like that you segue all these answers into bigger things on ocean themes. It's fantastic. We're going to head back to La Vie, Miss Barras, and we'll wrap up with Avoca West. Come on in North Topsail Beach and take us away. Hey.
Hi. So I was also wondering, how hard is it to catch plankton? Because, they're so small.
That's a really good question. And in fact, the fact that they are so small makes them much easier to catch because they can't run away. And so all you need to do is essentially collect water or drag something through the water, and then you'll get them. So they're not able to, like with fish, if you try and catch a fish with a net, the fish are able to escape. The plankton can't really go anywhere. So we have these plankton nets, and as we saw with those fancy buckets that I collect my water from, we just close those buckets at depth, and the plankton are in the water. So it's really, really, really easy to catch the plankton. They're just kind of chilling in the water, and then we're able to filter them down onto our filters. So yeah, catching the plankton is not the hard part. It's what we do with them once we've caught them. That's the slightly more challenging bit.
Great question. Thanks, Levi. Miss Baraz, so many of you, come on in and take us away. Hey.
How long can planktons live for, and how much plankton poop do you collect each day?
Ooh.
Sorry, what was the second one?
Well,
How long do
the
plankton live
second
for?
one is how much plankton poo do you collect each day, and how long do plankton live?
Oh, beautiful. So it depends on your species of phytoplankton. So these phytoplankton are really, really, really tiny. So there's some kinds which can basically grow. So the way these phytoplankton grow is they split themselves. So unlike you and I, they don't necessarily grow, reproduce, and then die. They often split themselves into two. So they act very similar to bacteria in the way that they divide. So I suppose it depends what you define as die by one of these phytoplankton. Because if you say that you have one cell and then it splits into two, has that one cell died? But essentially they're doubling what we call their doubling time. So the amount of time that it takes for one cell to become two cells, that can be on the order of, okay, for the very fast growing ones, it can be on the order of about half a day to a day. It can also be much slower than that. So in areas where they're much less nutrients or they're much more light limited, that growth rate can be much slower. It can be on the order of days, maybe weeks even. But yes, so essentially they can grow incredibly fast. So when conditions are good, when they have lots of nutrients, lots of food essentially to be able to eat, when the ocean is very fertile, it has lots of these nutrients in it, and it has lots of light, they're able to grow at massive, massive, massive speeds, doubling about once or twice a day or so. Whereas when they're in areas which are much harder to survive, then they can sometimes struggle a little bit and grow slightly slower.
Thanks, guys. All right, Josh, we've had so much fun. Time flies and you're having fun. We are going to take just a couple more questions before we wrap up. But Illinois, if you guys want to come in for one, and then we'll wrap up with one from YouTube in a minute. Hey, guys.
You were going to ask why they use an ROV without people, and how long does they stay under?
Ooh.
How long can the ROV stay under, and why didn't you build it so that people can go on it?
Yeah, like a submersible. Great question.
Cool. Very good question. So in terms of how long it can stay under, I think it can stay under for about 48 hours. Is that right?
That's our record, but in theory, we can stay down indefinitely because it's attached to the ship and has power. So as long as there are no issues and as long as there's sample space, we can stay down there as long as we want.
Yep. So that would be the big reason why we'd bring it up, is because all of those jars, all of those things get full. We've collected all the stuff that we want. We now want to get it back onto the ship, be able to get all those samples so that we can send it back and collect more samples. That'd be the primary thing that would prevent one from staying out just indefinitely. Why we don't have people in there? Because to send people down that deep into the ocean is quite dangerous. It makes it a lot harder. While of course it is amazing to send a human being down there, to be down there in that experience of that incredibly dark world, I can literally only imagine what that experience would be like. I mean, we do get pretty close to it in here. Like I was not expecting it to feel as close to actually being under the water as it does when you're in here, but obviously it's not quite the same. But yes, I think it's just much easier and much safer. Because imagine if this ROV falls down to the down to the depth of the ocean, it's not great. Like, we really don't want to lose the ROV, but it's not the end of the world. Nobody has died. Whereas if there's a human being inside the ROV and it sinks, that is catastrophic. So I think that's why we don't put human beings inside them when we can.
That's a great answer with a lot of detail. Thanks, man. Guys, we could go all day with this. I know we could. I'm going to take one final one from Janae. She wanted to know, what is the favorite part of your job? And I know it's going to be really hard for you because you're excited about absolutely everything.
You are correct. It is a really hard question. The favorite part of my job, I would say it's a combination of two things. I would say it is the fact that I'm able to be on the edge of discovering. There's something about exploring the things that not only do I not know, but we collectively do not know. It's so exciting. Of course, it's really hard because nobody knows. And so you have to try and figure out what is actually happening in this place. But I find that so incredibly, incredibly exciting to be on that kind of cusp of what humanity knows. I love that part about my job. In terms of the actual kind of day-to-day life of my job, I really, really, really enjoy essentially the analytical approaches that we use, the way in which we're able to take the data that we have and make sense of it. That's one of the most exciting things I find in this world is so what happens at the end of these cruises is we collect a whole bunch of samples, we ship them all back to land, we then analyze a whole bunch of these samples through a whole bunch of very, very, very fancy pieces of equipment, and these pieces of equipment spit numbers back at us. These numbers are very meaningful, but they essentially just spit numbers back at us. They don't have any interpretation around them. We have to then create a story, the story that fits the data that we have. We have to try and create an explanation as to why we see what we're seeing. And that is one of the most exciting things that I do. It's really, really incredible because you start off and you're overwhelmed. You have no idea what's happening. And then slowly but surely, as you think about it more and more, as you come to different ideas of there might be this process happening with this process in conjunction with this other process, which we could use to explain this. It's so exciting to come together. And then at the end, somehow it ends up turning into a story which makes sense. And it's amazing. And that story which makes sense progresses the understanding of humanity just that little step further. And I find that so exciting. I would say that's the favorite part of my job.
I should say so. Oh, man. This has been such a fun broadcast. It's always such a thrill hanging out with the Falkor too, but you're personally welcome back on anytime because it's rare to find someone of your level of energy. Thank you so much for taking us on the journey today, guys. Again, if you want to check out more Falkor programs, they're all on our YouTube channel. They got an amazing website, more stuff than you can shake a stick at. And there's so much more in the deep sea that we like to explore. So please do join me in saying a big thank you to Josh and the team there. La vie, Miss Baraz. West, thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.